The season of Lent officially begins on Ash Wednesday, which we marked 4 days ago. Originally, however, the 40 days of Lent began today, the first Sunday in Lent. It was called Quadragesima, the 40th day before Good Friday. As you know, the number 40 has symbolic power in the Bible. Jesus was tempted 40 days in the desert. Noah's flood lasted 40 days. The Israelites wandered the wilderness 40 years. So the number is important to our faith. At some point, possibly in the 11th century, it was decided that Sundays should not be counted as days of Lenten fasting, as all Sundays are resurrection days, and they echo the Sunday that Jesus rose from the dead. But that left the medieval church 6 days short of their 40-day goal. So to make up the difference, they moved the start of Lent back to the Wednesday before Lent 1, adding 4 days, and then they tacked on Good Friday and Holy Saturday at the end, adding 2 days. So you get 6 again. In a way, all this was done so that you and I could have cake on Sundays. I, for one, do not intend to disappoint our ancestors in the faith. But this year, Lent is tricky. Haven't we already suffered deprivation these past 11 months? Aren't we daily forced to confront our own mortality at some level because of this pandemic? The usual admonitions of a parish priest to refrain from fun and deepen prayer life in Lent might seem a bit mean this year. Overkill. So, just this once, I will offer a slightly different take on the sacred season, perhaps a little lighter. As Jesus comes up out of the waters of baptism in today's gospel reading from Mark, a voice from heaven proclaims, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." I love how these words echo the words from the cloud that we heard just last week at the Transfiguration, when the voice says, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Bookending his years of ministry from baptism to Transfiguration, the voice of God affirms Jesus as beloved. Must have been kind of nice to have that parental figure cheering you on throughout your vocation. But notice the difference in who is being addressed each time. At his baptism, the voice of God speaks to Jesus directly, "You are my beloved." While on the mountain, the audience being addressed consists of Moses, Elijah, Peter, James, and John. "This is my beloved. Listen to him." Almost as if God is presenting Jesus to the world. I'd like to invite you for this season of Lent 2021 to hear the voice of God whispering in the ear of your heart. "You are my beloved. With you I am well pleased." For 40 days, let that message sink in. Open your mind, cluttered or distracted as it is, open it up to receiving that message. Welcome this one-on-one relationship with God, this personal invitation to let yourself be cherished. Let Lent steep you in God's parental love to cheer you on. Then at Easter, rejoice as God presents you to the world. "This is my beloved daughter, my beloved son. Listen to what she has to say." And then step forth into the world with your newly transfigured self. How I wish we took these church seasons more seriously. How I wish we'd let them truly change us. The pattern of their year in and year outness gradually eroding the carapace of self-protection we've constructed around our soul. There is a deep and ancient wisdom to the spiritual cycle of the church year. When you let it, our calendar will shape your faith and your character. Similar to how nature's seasons guide creation through the year, from growth in spring to maturity in summer, decline in fall, and death in winter, the church guides your spirit through its seasons each year until the pattern grooves itself into your soul. But only if you let it. Unlike nature's, you need to opt out into these seasons. You need to opt into these seasons. How I wish we took them more seriously. Now, incidentally, the word Lent comes from the Old English word lengthen, or springtime. It's also related to the West Germanic langitinas, or lengthening. Springtime and lengthening. Nature and church share these deeper meanings. And especially this year, it's important to see how Lent is not just about death. It's more a state of dormancy, preparation for new life, roots growing under the soil of your spirit, making ready to burst forth as the days lengthen into Easter, rebirth, and resurrection. After his baptism, the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. The Greek word for immediately, euthys, shows up 41 times in Mark's gospel, immediately. Clearly, there is an urgency to the narrative, as it constantly yanks us by the arm into the next scene and the next chapter. And the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness. The Greek word for drove is ekbala, and it's a violent movement. Jesus is shot out like a cannonball into the desert. That same word, ekbala, forms our word ballistics. Yanked from belovedness at the River Jordan into wilderness in the desert, Jesus suddenly confronts the devil's temptations. One way to look at this jarring narrative shift from belovedness to wilderness is to think of Satan whispering in Jesus' ear, "So you're beloved, are you? Prove it." Mark doesn't dwell on the story today like Matthew and Luke do, but you know it. Hungry, Jesus? Turn these stones into bread. Feeling vulnerable? Jump off the temple to remind yourself that, in fact, you're always protected by angels. Feeling weak? Worship me, and I'll give you power over all the nations. How Jesus proves his belovedness is by choosing to remain hungry, vulnerable, and weak. He lessens himself into humanity rather than taking the easier path of divinity. Knowing that the relationships he is about to forge with disciples and followers need to happen alongside them and not top down, Jesus scales down his divinity to be with us and among us. I invited you to spend this Lent hearing God's voice calling you beloved. But like Jesus, these 40 days are also wilderness for us. God tells us, "You are my beloved." Do you believe it? Unlike Satan, God is not looking for proof from you. But how will you show forth God's cherishing of you? Will you give in to the temptation to go about with business as usual this spring, not letting in the lessons of Lent to teach you and help you grow? Or will you let yourself lie dormant for 40 days, hungry, vulnerable, weak, trusting God to water your soul and tend to your heart? Do you believe you are beloved? Will you do the internal work that will strengthen you so that you shine forth at Easter? That's what all this deprivation stuff is about. That's why the prayer, the fasting, and the almsgiving. It's not to make you sad. It's to focus you on what really matters. In his book, A Season for the Spirit, Martin L. Smith writes, "The Spirit is wind driving us towards places where we will be exposed to liberating truth." I think of Lent as a desert in which to learn these truths. Still, what I mostly want to do is hang out at the oasis every day. If you're like me, you need to be dislodged from complacency and shot forth by the Spirit into disquieting wilderness. That's where you will come to believe you are beloved. And the words, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return," are not just said to remind us that death is inevitable. They also recall to us how precious life is. God sent Noah the rainbow only after the tempest and the loss. You are beloved. Life is precious. What will you do with these two truths in this Lenten season?